everyone, I'm Catherine. Today I'm going to be talking about the 4 or 5 things that I like the least about the Glowforge. So a little bit of context, I've been working with laser cutters for over 10 years and I've worked with a wide variety of them. I've had this Glowforge for a couple weeks because my company bought it for our design studio, and I get to borrow it for the first couple months until our studio is back open. So I've been playing with this and really comparing it to the other laser cutters that I have experience with, which include on the professional end, Epilogue and Universal, and then more on the hobbyist end, I personally own a Dremel Digilab 40-watt laser cutter. And that's pretty similar to a full spectrum because it's based on the same hardware. So that's what I'm really used to. And I've been using this Glowforge Pro, which is a 45-watt laser cutter, for, like I said, a couple weeks now. So first blush, just wanted to share a couple things that I really don't like. I do want to caveat that because in my heart, I'm a nice person. I feel bad saying negative things. Glowforge might be the right laser cutter for you. And if it is, I'm really happy for you. I'm glad that you're enjoying it. For me, the Glowforge does not fit the level of control and precision that I personally would like for a personal laser cutter. And here's a couple of reasons why. First of all, I'll get the stupid one out of the way. Glowforge's branding kind of rubs me the wrong way. So they market this as a 3D laser printer, and then all of their materials reference to this as a printer. And I understand maybe that softens it, or the branding that they've chosen to kind of make it magical and in the software and stuff, make it like light and airy and like the magic is happening. It's a great branding strategy for an entry-level laser cutter machine. But for me as a professional who's used lasers, it's a laser cutter or engraver, or it's a heavy-duty tool. And so I'm not going to reference it as a 3D laser printer because that just feels wrong. So, okay, stupid ones out of the way. I really don't like that. The second one is a major concern and the main reason why I would not buy a Glowforge for my own personal use. Glowforge is a very closed system. What that means is that there are constraints put in place on this device and on its software and how you get files into this device. And that makes a lot of sense for an entry-level machine because it makes it a lot easier to get started. If it's constrained, you have kind of like the bumper lane to go down, and it's harder to mess things up. It makes a lot of sense. For me personally, that makes it less usable. So the fact that I have to use their software that has to be accessed via Wi-Fi is a little bit of a bummer because sometimes I don't have Wi-Fi or for other reasons. We lose Wi-Fi quite often where I live, so that would suck if I was in the middle of trying to laser cut something and it just wouldn't work. The second part of that is when you set up your file in the software, you have to send it to their cloud processing, their cloud server, in order to finish fixing the file and sending it to the laser cutter. There's not a direct connection between your machine and the laser cutter. There is no way to plug a cord from your machine to this laser cutter to get files onto it. You have to go through their cloud server. That might be okay for some people. That's a blocker for me because this is like any other power tool in my toolbox. If I need to drill something, I want to pick up my drill and I want to use it. If I want to laser cut something, I don't want to be dependent on somebody's cloud server and how busy that cloud server is. And one specific way that shows up is how they have a fast lane for processing your files if you pay for their pro subscription. That immediately kind of separates people who are paying for that subscription, which is quite a hefty price, and then people who just want to use the laser cutter. Just let us use the laser cutter. Please, I have already paid a lot of money for this laser cutter. Let me send a file directly to it. Don't block me and make me go through a cloud server. Not a fan. The other aspect of that closed system, and because you have to go through the cloud server, you cannot easily repeat a file. So if I have an entire file laid out on a piece of wood, I just want to pull that piece out, put another piece in, run the same file, I have to send it again. Or at the very least, I have to reinitiate it from the software. There's no interface on this laser cutter. There's no way of saying just repeat. That's something I've gotten used to on my Dremel, which like I said is very similar to the full spectrum. There's a little touch screen on the laser cutter itself. It stores the files that you send it, and the last chunk of files you can repeat. It allows you to just run the outline of it to see where it's going to go, put your material in, and run it without having to touch your computer. That's awesome. I love that. Glowforge does not let you do that. And for a lot of the time, maybe you don't need to repeat your files as much, but when I'm running a series of like a jewelry collection, I'm going to cut the same things out in order to be the most efficient way of cutting out all of those materials. The last part about that closed system that's really frustrating is that the material settings, they only provide settings for their proprietary material. At first I thought that was really cool because it has a QR code, you put it in, it knows what the material is, and it has the right settings for it. However, it doesn't have any other settings. You have to manually put in all of the other settings. Thankfully, the Glowforge community has provided a lot of settings, and there's actually a crowdsourced spreadsheet of those settings that I'll link. That is a great place to start. But the fact that when you pay this much for a machine and they don't give you baseline settings for really common materials, it's quite frustrating. But it does tie into their business model in which they make a lot of money, I bet, from selling those materials. And so by only providing the settings for it, they can quality control the materials, they know that their settings are going to work on them, and that for entry level that's really important to make it easy, not to mess it up. That's great. And that's why it doesn't work for me, because I source my materials from other places, so they're less expensive. So overall, the fact that this is such a closed system is a huge bummer for me, and the main reason why I would not buy a Glowforge for myself. The third thing that I dislike about the Glowforge is there is no kind of fine-tuned control. This ties into that closed system, but in a slightly different way. So fine-tuned control are things like focusing on the material, placing the files in a really specific place, and they just don't provide the tools to do that. The main way to place your files is with this one camera in the middle of the lid. This camera takes a picture of the bed, and then it updates that automatically, so you can see as you cut things, you can see what space is still available. That works pretty well, but as I've been cutting, I noticed that the registration is off. It's not really fine-tuned. And for me, when I'm cutting large collections of jewelry or other aspects, I like to use as much of my material as possible to be efficient and cost-effective. And that means getting my files really close together and using as much of that 12 by 20 space as possible. This makes it a lot harder to do that. A couple of ways that I do that on other laser cutters is by moving the laser head to a very specific spot on the material. A lot of laser heads will have a little red light to show you where that laser is going to hit. And that's really helpful because it shows you where that corner is, and you can lay out your pieces that way. Glowforge does not have that little red light. You don't really move the head around. The head only moves when it is cutting and it is engraving. Another way that I do fine-tooth controlling for where my files are is by using the trace outline feature. To do that on my Dremel, there actually is a feature. I just click a button, and the laser head with that little red light traces the bounding box of my file. Super helpful because then I can move that file a little bit. That's not a thing that Glowforge has. And for something like Epilogue, I would send a file over to the Epilogue, and I would actually start running it with the lid open. And what that does is that the laser doesn't fire unless the lid is closed, but that little red dot shows me the actual literal path that the laser is going to take, and then I can position it a little bit differently before I close the lid and run the file. That's really important for me specifically. Might not be important to you, but that fine-tooth control is really more on that power user, professional level user kind of setup for lasers. The fourth thing that I really dislike about Glowforge, I've already hinted out earlier, and that's the price of their proprietary materials. So they sent a sample pack of their materials with the laser cutter, which is really nice. It's smart of them so that everyone can kind of try out those materials, see how the settings work when it has a QR code, and kind of get used to that ease and have success with their first couple laser cuts. It's a great way to introduce and get people going really quickly on the laser cutter itself. However, when you go to their store to replenish, you'll see these boards are super expensive. For example, they have a few different really nice plywoods. One of them is maple. So if you have a maple plywood, that's a nice wood on the surface, but one board of it for a 12 by 20 is $22. So that's one piece of wood for your Glowforge. Granted, it does come with the QR code on it, so the settings are going to work perfectly. It also comes with the tape on the material so that it's not going to get as scorched, which is great. So if you are doing projects where you're going to do that a lot, or you just want that kind of handheld material, you want that kind of handheld experience for using a material, these are going to be good for you. But for me, I use a lot of material. $22 for one piece. The prices on my jewelry would have to go up a lot. Another example is the acrylic. So they do sell a good variety of different acrylic colors, which is great if you do need access to acrylic, you know that's going to cut well. But you can also get acrylic at so many different places. Acrylic is very standard, so as long as it's like 1/8 of an inch or 1/4 of an inch if you have 45 watts, you can cut through any of it. So their acrylic is $18.50 for a 12 by 20 piece, and that's about 7 cents per square inch. I figure out the square inch prices so that I know how to price my jewelry both for wholesale and for retail prices. And the acrylic that I purchase, a 12 by 18 sheet, that is $9. So it's a little bit of a different size, but it's less than half the price. And for square inch, that is 4 cents per square inch. So almost half the price. That allows you to be more efficient, be more cost effective if you're doing this as a business. And so that's why it is really disappointing that Dremel only supports their proprietary materials with the settings that they provide, instead of at least providing guidelines and baseline settings for the wide variety of materials that they can use. And you can't even, acrylic is acrylic is acrylic. Yes, there is extruded versus cast, but their acrylic settings would definitely work on any of my 1/8 inch acrylic. Wood is a little bit different because wood, depending on the glue they use, if it's plywood, or depending on the knots and the quality and the flatness of the wood, if it's a solid piece, that's going to affect your settings. But acrylic, it's plastic. It's going to cut with the same settings. But you can't use their settings unless it sees the QR code, which now that I'm saying that out loud, I kind of want to grab one of the QR codes from the acrylic and put it on my acrylic and see if that lets me use it. I'll get back to you on that because I might hack that. But anyway, that number 4 thing was their materials are really expensive, and that's okay if you want to spend that, but there's so many other places you can get materials for laser cutting at a much less expensive price point. So overall, Please definitely balance out this video with my other two, where I have the overall review and I have the top 4 or 5 things about the Glowforge. But overall for me, the Glowforge is not the laser cutter that satisfies what I need out of a kind of mid to more professional level laser cutter. I'm excited to continue checking out other laser cutters so that by the time my Dremel kind of craps out in a few years, I know what type of laser cutter I want next. So thank you for watching. Let me know, what are your least favorite things about Glowforge so we can kind of commiserate together. Or if you totally don't agree with me, feel free to tell me. But like I said, if you like it, I'm really glad that you like it. And if you don't, then you're in good company. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know if you have any other questions or different tips and tricks you want me to try with the Glowforge before it moves to my studio. So thanks for watching.